Welcome to the board's CIP work session. I'm acknowledging that we have a quorum, and if everyone would stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I can get approval of the revised agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Today, the board will hold a second work session to continue consideration of the superintendent's recommended fiscal year FY 2021 capital budget and FY 2021 through 2026 capital improvements program and the following specific matters. Supplement A, the superintendent's recommendation on the boundary study of the Clarksburg, Northwest, and Seneca Valley clusters. Supplement B, the superintendent's recommendation on the boundary study for Forest Knolls, Montgomery Knolls, and Pine Crest Elementary Schools. Prior to today, the board has held one work session and 3 public hearings on the CIP. During those meetings, board members had the opportunity to recommend alternatives to the superintendent's recommendations, hear from the community, and pose questions regarding the CIP. If there are any other items that board members wish to modify, I am suggesting that we identify those alternatives today. If board members wish to identify any alternatives today, they should do so through a motion. If there is a second, a vote would be taken after a brief discussion of the alternative. It will require 5 votes to place alternative before the public for comment, along with the superintendent's recommendation. If the alternative is adopted by the board, staff will notify the affected communities so that they may testify to the superintendent's recommendation and the alternative on Monday, November the 25th. Community members do not need to attend the hearing to make their views known to the board. Comments may be emailed to boe@mcps-md.org. All board members automatically receive copies of emails sent to this address. Please keep in mind that a vote to place an alternative before the board does not commit board members to support the alternative when final action is taken. Nor does it preclude the board from making any changes to the CIP when it takes final action. I should reiterate that a hearing will be held on Monday, November the 25th, if additional alternatives are offered today. Otherwise, the board will take final action on these matters on Tuesday, November the 26th at 5:30 p.m. Dr. Smith, do you have any comments before we get started?
Just want to once again thank the staff, both those members in front of you, the members in the audience, and the many other individuals that were engaged in this significant proposal that we've put in front of you today for the facilities of Montgomery County Public Schools. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And at this time, we will begin our presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Andrew Zuckerman, Chief Operating Officer, and I'm going to turn it over to Adrian Carmijas, our Director of Capital Planning. If it's okay with you, Ms. Evans, we'll start with Supplement B, the Forest Knolls, and then move to Seneca.
That's fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to just go through the presentation overview, and then we will get right into the items. We will first, as Dr. Zuckerman said, go through Supplement B, which is the recommendation for Forest Knolls, Montgomery Knolls, and Pine Crest boundaries. Then we will go into Supplement A, which is the superintendent's recommendation for the Clarksburg, Northwest, and Seneca Valley boundaries. And then we will review the recommendations again in the 21 capital budget and the 21 to 26 CIP. So Supplement B, just to recap what the superintendent's recommendation was, it was option 1 from the boundary study. The recommendation reassigned zone 3 and 4. It reduces overutilization at Forest Knolls Elementary School, decreases the disparity of farms participation between the 3 elementary schools from 28.7 to 18.7%. Provides more comparability among the 3 schools with respect to race ethnic composition of the schools, provides contiguous boundaries and does not reassign walkers, and maintains the current middle school assignments for all 3 schools. So wherever they currently go is where they will continue to go in this recommendation. This is the map of the recommended changes. You can see the hashed areas are zones F3 and F4. Those are the proposed zones to be reassigned to Montgomery Knolls and Pinecrest. I just want to go through the phasing again, because I know this one is a little tricky because of the K2, 3, 5 schools. So as we always do, the recommendation is to grandfather the grade 5 students at Forest Knolls. So in the 2020-21 school year, those students would be grandfathered and recommended, the ones that are recommended to be reassigned. They'll complete elementary school in their current school of assignment, which would be Forest Knolls. The grade 2 students in the 2020-21 school year recommended to be reassigned will complete grade 2 at their current school of attendance, which is Forest Knolls. However, in the 21-22 school year, those students recommended to be reassigned but remain in their current school, which is Forest Knolls, for grade 2, will then be reassigned to Pinecrest to continue grades 3 through 5. And the reason why this was being recommended was to avoid the grade 2 students in the 2021 school year, if they're proposed to be reassigned, to attend 3 different school buildings in the career of their elementary school span. So those are the recommendations. And now for discussion.
Okay. So, I don't see any lights, but does anybody have any comments, any questions? Just around supplement B? It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it was pretty straightforward. And in fact, I think I only heard one person who came and spoke about having a more extended grandfathering,
Right.
essentially grandfathering everybody at Forest Knolls.
Right, so so the kids would all go through their entire elementary school, so it would be the rising kindergartners that would have, if they were being recommended to be reassigned, would start then. So everybody else would remain at the school, so it would be, and we figured this out, it would be a 3-year implementation, but for both of those schools, because again, it's a K2, 3, 5 school. And the only other thing that we did here during the process was about the middle schools, and most that you heard was that they wanted to stay at their assigned middle school.
Okay. So seeing no lights, no questions, we appreciate the work that you've done, and we can move on to the next portion, supplement A.
Okay. So this is supplement A, the boundary recommendation for the Clarksburg, Northwest, and Seneca Valley clusters. Again, I will recap the superintendent's recommendation. It's a variation of staff-developed option 11A from the boundary study process. It advances the 3 policy factors for most of the schools involved in the boundary study by meeting those objectives. The recommendation reduces the utilization rates to the maximum extent possible, maximizes walkers, minimizes farm disparities at both high schools and the middle school levels. This is the specific recommendation. Reassigns from Clarksburg High School to Seneca Valley High School, the Cabin Branch community, and you can see the area in the Clarksburg Elementary School service area. It reassigns the area south of Old Baltimore Road and west of I-270, also in the Clarksburg Elementary School service area. And it reassigns the William B. Gibbs Elementary School service area with the exception of the future walkers. From Northwest High School, it reassigns the Clopper Mill Elementary School island, the Spark Matsunaga Elementary School island, and the northern portion of the Germantown Elementary School service area. And that is sort of bounded by the forested area south of Fountain Hills Drive. At the middle school level, it reassigns from Neillsville Middle School to Rocky Hill Middle School, Captain Daly and Fox Chapel Elementary School service areas, so both those elementary schools. It reassigns from Rocky Hill Middle School to Neillsville Middle School, the 3 areas that were recommended for reassignment at the high school level, the Cabin Branch community in the Clarksburg service area, the area south of Old Baltimore Road and west of I-270 in the Clarksburg Elementary School service area, and the Gibbs Elementary School service area, with the exception of the walkers. It also reassigns from Roberto Clemente Middle School to Kingsview Middle School, the portion of Great Seneca Creek that articulates to Roberto Clemente currently, and reassigns from Kingsview Middle School to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School, the Spark Matsunaga Elementary School island, so it will have that straight articulation to Seneca Valley High School. Here are the 2 maps. On the left-hand side is the high schools the high school service areas and what they would look like. Again, the hatched areas are the areas to be reassigned. On the right-hand side are the middle school recommendation reassignments. And again, the hash marks indicate the reassignments, the proposed reassignments. There was some discussion during the public hearing about Germantown and the split for Germantown Elementary School. So we just wanted to go through that and see if there were any additional questions. The recommendation maintains the articulation. This is very important because I know that there was some testimony and maybe some confusion about Germantown when we say the split, thinking that the elementary schools go off and split to different middle schools. The elementary school, the Germantown Elementary School service area remains as whole when they go to middle school. They all go to Clemente Middle School. They currently go to Clemente Middle School. Clemente Middle School is split between two high schools service areas, Northwest and Seneca Valley. So in the superintendent's recommendation, while the service area is split, it is split only at the high school level, not at the middle school level. So all the Germantown Elementary School students will go to Clemente, and then in the superintendent's recommendation, they are split between Northwest and Seneca Valley. Clemente is split between Northwest and Seneca Valley. So half the kids go to Seneca Valley, half the kids go to Northwest. The recommendation for Germantown Elementary School, we really were looking at it from a utilization and geography lens. It addresses the utilization rates at both the high schools. It gives a little bit more room at Northwest High School, but doesn't overutilize Seneca Valley High School. And also it maximizes walkers at both of the high schools. There will be, in the northern portion, students that will be able to walk to Seneca Valley High School.
Okay.
What we did was, and I know it's hard to read, and I can go through them if you need me to. What we did was we showed the superintendent's recommendation, which is in the second box right here, and this is for Northwest High School. And then the third box is the reassigning all to Seneca Valley, and the last box is keeping all the Germantown Elementary School students at Northwest. So when we look back sort of what the lenses we were looking for utilization and for geography, this is more utilization. So you can see that by keeping the students, for example, at Northwest, if we keep them all at Northwest, Northwest stays almost 300 overutilized. And if we reassign all of the Germantown students to Seneca Valley High School, it would be about 122 seats overutilized. On the flip side, at Seneca Valley, if we assign all the students to Seneca Valley High School, Seneca Valley would be about 52 seats over. And if we have all of the students, all of the Germantown students at Northwest, there would be about 122 seats available at Seneca Valley. And so in the superintendent's recommendation, we were trying to find that sweet spot, again, of relieving a little bit more at Northwest, but not overutilizing Seneca Valley. And here, it's if we maintain all the students at Germantown, you have about 122 seats available at Seneca Valley.
Okay. Okay, so we will start with Mrs. Modrowski since she has a question. Your light's on.
Yeah, so, couple of things. There was discussion about one of the lines for Germantown Elementary, one of the boundary lines kind of cutting through a neighborhood, or like a street, I guess is basically, I know I was trying to really look. Can you just explain how that was decided as opposed to keeping that straight together? And
So, so in the maps, and I think, I see that Mrs. O'Neill has one, and I can share, I might have a couple extra more. So the way that it was done is we tried to look for geography, natural geography. And in some areas you can do that, in some areas you can't. In this case, it was a combination of both things. There is a forested area on the left side of the map, where Fountain Hills is, right below Fountain Hills. There's a forested area. Right below that forested area is a cul-de-sac, Lake Placid, and I think that that's what it was being referred to, is that small area. Mm-hmm. The issue is that on Liberty Mill, one of the statements was that we would have a bus just coming directly up to Lake Placid. will be other bus riders as well that will be going to Northwest. That area stays in Northwest. And so there are, the line that was drawn was by street and by that forested area. We do boundary lines behind street, property lines, and that's on the other side where there had to be some kind of demarcation about where to draw that boundary. The community below on the other side is actually also a cul-de-sac, but their entrance is much further south. So again, there's no connection between that community and the community that is being recommended to go north to Seneca Valley.
But those were all factors that you considered.
Yes, and we
when
looked at
the
them, and I
study was
actually
done.
drove out there.
Yeah.
And if you drive out there and you look, the communities are different. I know that there was a question about HOAs, that small community on Lake Placid is in the same HOA as that Fountain Hills. But there is definitely a demarcation and a separation between those two areas. And again, the students all stay together and they all continue to go to middle school together as well. And so, and we've heard those conversations before with homeowners associations or pools, being at the same pools. But from a geographic perspective, we looked at it. And we also looked at it from a utilization perspective. So what made sense, where to sort of draw that line.
What would be the effects of incorporating that area into the same boundary?
So it isn't a lot of houses that would go, but then what would happen is that I don't know, because on Liberty Mill, that's something we would have to look at. The sidewalks are not, they come and they go. They're not consistent across Liberty Mill. So I don't know whether or not they would be bused. That's something that we'd have to look at. Whereas a lot of the in the northern portion, that demarcation was so that we could have walkers go to Seneca Valley High School.
Okay, so if we wanted to take a look at that, is that something that can be done even after today? No. With the alternative.
Correct, it would be an alternative.
Okay. Okay, well, I'll sit with that for a second because I'm not sure where my
And if I
colleagues
could
are.
just add also one more thing, if you look at that map, across the street from Lake Placid are also homes that are on Liberty Mill. And so you would have on one side of the street, houses going to Northwest, and on the other side of the street, houses going to Seneca Valley.
Okay. Okay,
So, are you done? Oh.
I mean,
Or you may not be.
want
I
me
was
to just be done with that one
No,
thing?
no. I was just gonna open it up to everybody to ask questions because, we've had 3 nights of hearings. We've had a ton of emails, and I just wanted to once again say thank you for all the work that you've done, but also thank our community because they took a really deep dive, as they always do, into the work that's going on in our system. And it seems like if you are ever at a loss or need to employ people, that we have people in the community that are very comfortable with doing this work. But I don't know where you will have a more engaged community than what we have here in Montgomery County. We heard some really great testimony from our students, from teachers that aren't even in MCPS, from our elected officials, and just really appreciate everybody coming out and giving their thoughts and feedback, and just want everyone to know that the board has taken everything into careful consideration, that our staff, you heard Ms. Kara Mijas talk about how she's driven to an area to look. The board members are not making hasty decisions. We had a tour that we took around the boundaries that are being considered right now. We have our book that we went through really carefully, so I just want everybody to know that we've given thought to everything that we've heard and the work that the system has done as a result of what the board charged the system to do. So I'll just go around the table and just ask board members. I know we're not done, but if you have any comments and thoughts about what you've heard so far around Supplement A and Supplement B, I would just ask you to just share your thoughts with staff. Mrs. O'Neill.
Well, so we have signs about option 11B, which we don't actually have an option 11B, but, and I had, a number of us had asked, we had heard, it's from the Gibbs community. Can you explain publicly about this request?
Sure. Let me pull out just all my notes. So the proposal that was brought to the board members from the Gibbs community, it is somewhat a variation of option 12. And the first two things that it does is it moves Daly and Fox Chapel from the Clarksburg service area, and then does two different things depending. They offered actually two variations. One would send the students to Seneca Valley. One would send some of the students to Northwest. So in their first variation, it's Daly going to Northwest and it's Fox Chapel going to Seneca Valley. But both of those two service areas leave Clarksburg. In the first option, Daly, the recommendation or the proposal is to go to Kingsview Middle School. So they would have then a straight articulation from Kingsview Middle School then to Northwest High School. And Fox Chapel would stay at Neelsville and then go to Seneca Valley. The last part of that proposal is that Cabin Branch and Gibbs remain in the Clarksburg cluster. So that's why it's somewhat similar to option 12, because in option 12, both Fox Chapel and Daly are reassigned, and Cabin Branch and Gibbs remain in the cluster. With that one, some of the concerns that staff, in just looking at it, Kingsview would be overutilized because you'd be taking a service area and you'd be moving it to Kingsview Middle School, which is in the Northwest cluster, and not relieving Kingsview at all by moving any kids out. So that school would become overutilized by about a little more than 200 students. And then those same students, of course, then go to Northwest High School. The proposal does maintain the superintendent's recommendations for the Northwest cluster. So it moves out the two islands and moves out Germantown. But Daly is much larger than those three pieces, which means that then Northwest actually becomes more overutilized. The other thing that it does so that's utilization. Geography, it does become a non-contiguous boundary because Daly would leave from Clarksburg and then go to Northwest, so there would be a non-contiguous boundary. And then, so that's geography. And then from the socioeconomic, race, ethnic composition, Clarksburg their farms would go down, again, similar to option 12. And Northwest, I think that I have to look, we didn't do as much looking into Northwest and Seneca Valley. Seneca Valley's farms percentage would go down a little bit because as opposed to option 12, because not both Fox Chapel and Daly are going to Seneca Valley, it's just Fox Chapel, but clearly not as much as if with the superintendent's option.
And what about Waters Landing? Because I recall
So that's the other one. That's the Cabin Branch. That's the Cabin Branch proposal.
Oh, okay.
Turn your light.
So with Neelsville, it would be, again, very similar. The farms percentage would go down because Daly would be leaving. They'd be reassigned to Kingsview. But again, Daly would not be Neelsville is not taking in any students. So by the number of students that get assigned to Kingsview, the same amount of students then leave Neelsville, which is about 200 students. So again, when we look at utilization, you'd sort of have that off balance between Kingsview being overutilized and Neelsville being underutilized.
Dr. Daka, did you have any comments, thoughts? Okay. Ms. Silvestri?
Do you care to go into the other proposed option from the community?
I am here to serve.
Thank you.
So, absolutely. So I can go in. So this other option is what I will call the Cabin Branch option. Again, it's a proposal that came from the community. This option, they referred to it as option 9, and then with some changes to option 9. There are some significant changes, but again, option 9 is sort of the base at where they started. This one's a little confusing one, so I'll just try to give the highlights. So in option 9, Daly moves from Clarksburg to Seneca Valley, and so does Gibbs. So Daly and Gibbs. And let me start with Clarksburg. In their option, they don't move Daly, so Daly remains. So the only service area from Clarksburg that moves is Gibbs.
Can you put the map up?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
I can do that.
I'm trying to find it all in here.
Yes, so, if we look at just the high school map, the Gibbs area is this area right here. This is the Gibbs area. And so in this option, in the proposal that they have, they move the Gibbs area from Clarksburg to Seneca Valley. Superintendent's recommendation does that as well. It reassigns Germantown from Northwest to Seneca, the same thing as the superintendent's does, and the two islands. What becomes sort of then the difference is that in this proposal, they reassign Waters Landing Elementary School, which is in the Seneca Valley service area, and they reassign it to Northwest. The Waters Landing service area, 70% of the students can walk to Seneca Valley High School, and over 30% of the students can walk to currently King Middle School. And in this proposal, they reassign them to both Kingsview and Northwest. So all of those 70% and 30% of students would then have to be bused to both Kingsview and Northwest High School. The other thing, and I'll continue with the rest of it at the high school level, the proposal also includes reassigning a portion of McNair, the non-walkers, from Northwest to Seneca Valley, and reassigns Fox Chapel from Clarksburg to Northwest. So I think the idea was to sort of move kids in and out. The issue is that there aren't a lot of non-walking McNair students. So what happens is you're moving Waters Landing into Northwest, you're moving Fox Chapel into Northwest, you're only moving out, again, Germantown, the two islands, and a small portion of McNair into Seneca Valley. And so what that does, again, if we look at the three factors from a utilization perspective, it actually makes Northwest more overutilized than if we didn't do anything to them and just left them the way they are. At Seneca Valley, because we're moving Waters Landing out and Fox Chapel not into, or any other service area but Gibbs and the service areas from Northwest, it leaves Seneca Valley with, I think, about 300 seats available. And so it's at the high school. And at Clarksburg, it relieves them, and I think it's actually more than, I'd have to check. It does reduce their overutilization. At the middle school level, it reassigns, and let me go into the geography. So from a geography perspective, there is non-contiguous boundaries for, the only one that has contiguous boundaries, Seneca Valley. Both Clarksburg and Northwest do not have contiguous boundaries because of those moves. And from a farms perspective, it actually reduces the farms. So if you look at the three high schools, it does bring the farms percentage, I believe it was 7%. The disparity is about 7%. Superintendent's was about 12%. So it does bring the disparity at the high schools lower. However, there is a huge implication to that. And it's not only at the high school level, but it's also at the middle school level. So at the middle school level, the recommendation is to move Fox Chapel from Neelsville to Rocky Hill, which is in the superintendent's recommendation. It reassigns Gibbs from Rocky Hill to Neelsville, also in the superintendent's recommendation. It reassigns the Great Seneca portion and the islands. Again, the two differences are Waters Landing moves from King to Kingsview Middle School. And it reassigns, again, the portion of McNair from Kingsview to King. The issue, again, with Waters Landing and King and Kingsview is that by moving those students out of King and into Kingsview, it significantly overutilizes Kingsview Middle School. And then does the reverse for Neelsville. It's the same thing. It's you would have an over whoever you're moving in and you're moving out but not repopulating. It's the same thing. You're having that imbalance of utilization. The geography again is non-contiguous because of those service areas. And I think that the biggest issue here was that, and I know that this was brought up, and I know that there were conversations about adding Kingsview into the conversation, especially about the farms. So the disparity in the farms between the superintendent's recommendation at the middle school level, the farms percentage, so in this proposal, and I have these written down, the farms percentage for the middle schools, the disparity is 29.9%, so 30%, meaning between the highest farm school and the lowest farm school is 30%. With Neelsville being at 58.7, they're currently at 66%, and Kingsview being at 28.8%, and I believe they're at 23 and change percent. The disparity between the middle school farms in the superintendent's recommendation is 30.7%. So we're talking about moving a lot of students around for a difference of 0.8% disparity between the highest and the lowest farm schools at the middle school level. And so I'll just give you those numbers too. The lowest, the superintendent's recommendation for Neelsville is 54.5% farms as part of his recommendation. Again, with this proposal, it's 58.7, and Kingsview again is 23.8%. So again, if you look at the highest and the lowest between the superintendent's recommendation and the farms, it's 30.7%, and the proposal here is 29.9%. Again, a disparity of 0.8% difference. And as I said in the beginning, when you look at this option and you see the additional students that are impacted by a proposed reassignment, it is a lot more students. And we talk about one of the guiding parameters that we do for boundary studies, and while we have to impact students because we have to reassign them, we try to impact the least amount of students. This is impacting a lot of students to look at a farms or try to address a farms issue or a thought of an issue, and at the end of the day, it's a 0.8% difference between the superintendent's recommendation and this proposal.
Dr. Smith?
I was just going to, there was a lot of conversation during the hearing about Kerwin's 55%. Several people made the comment that if Neelsville drops under 55%, then they won't get the benefit of Kerwin. So let me be very clear. First of all, Kerwin hasn't passed in any form. It will be considered this legislative session. And the current proposal that's on the table would put the 55% threshold in place in 2028. There's a lot of potential for change in Montgomery County as we gain 2,500 students per year plus each year except last year. We've gained between 2,200 and 2,600 students every year for more than a decade. Last year we gained 1,200. This year we gained almost 2,600 net gain. So I just want to share with everybody in the world, the 55% threshold is not a factor in this consideration. Didn't want anyone to remember that and think, oh, that concerns me when I heard that 54% number.
That's helpful, thank you.
The other thing we heard a lot about was transportation time in the superintendent's recommendation. And as a mother of a child that has a 50-minute morning commute, an hour and 15 on the way back, taking two different MCPS buses, I can understand that's a concern. You have other areas of the counties that are also very heavily trafficked, that's the word. What can you put in place to minimize transportation time so that, because nobody wants their children to be on buses for a long time. So we want to let them sleep in as much as possible, get to school as soon as possible, and get home as soon as possible.
So transportation and routing is something we look at every single year in terms of trying to find the best routes, the safest routes, the most efficient. And that's something that's ongoing, we'll continue to do. We have opportunities in the future with the county had passed a Kids Ride Free program, and so it's more students at high school in particular will have opportunities to take Ride On, and Dr. Smith has painted a vision of finding ways over the next several years to better integrate the public transit system with the school transportation system. So these are all possibilities. In the short run, it will be a combination of route analysis and as well as making sure that the times are within our range. And so the types of times that we've put forward are well within the range of a typical MCPS transportation route. So in this situation, we're not seeing anything that is an extreme case like what you just described for your child. And we're pretty quick to solve acute problems if there are any at the start of school. And traffic is a reality just in our community and in this region. And so I think this is just going to be an ongoing challenge that we have regardless of this boundary assignment. But these are the types of things that we have in place.
Yeah, I did go up to visit the Kevin Branch area and Neillsville commute this past weekend. And I have been tracking the traffic on the Waze app every day. So I'm not seeing anything extraordinary if we don't have a lot of stops along the way. But traffic is traffic, and there are going to be accidents and ice and storms and so forth. So anything that we can do to minimize those bus rides. Would you even ever consider changing the start time to, I don't know, later or earlier? Maybe not earlier, but something to think about for the future.
Dr. Smith?
We did an extensive analysis 2 years ago, and the beginning and ending times of schools, because we use our transportation fleet completely for all the runs in the morning and the afternoon, makes it very difficult even to change the elementary start times. Many of the elementary schools, the year before I came, the board voted to go to 9 and 9:30 start times for elementary schools, and we could find 6 routes that we could move from 9:30 back to 9 o'clock, only 6. And if you move the high school routes later, then you have to move the elementary routes later. And those would be board decisions.
No, I'm
And
thinking
then
maybe
you-
individual schools,
Yeah,
if there's a
and
problem, if you
so-
find a problem.
Yeah, and there is
I
a
know it's
little
been
bit of
done before.
variation in 5 minutes or so, depending on those sorts of things, but we can't change much of it, but we always look at it, and we always look for opportunities. I just don't want to give people the hope that you can do that without buying lots of buses and hiring lots of bus operators and all the other attendant people that we have to do that. The best opportunity is, as Dr. Zuckerman just said, to continue to work with the county government and invite more and more of our high school students to take public transportation. And certainly they'll have school system transportation if they want it and if communities want it. But the more of them that take transportation, the more flexibility we would have in the morning and in the afternoon to make those adjustments. And I think that shows real promise, given that across the nation, for many, many communities, public transportation is the best option for high school students, including right here in our own state and in the DC area. So that certainly has promise, I think, to give some adjustments and to get some of the vehicles off the road. The more we can do that, the better it is for the environment, the budget, and people's frustration level.
My last question is, because people have asked me this, so I want to ask, is there any way that the Neillsville project could be fast-tracked, made happen earlier?
So what's in the superintendent's recommendation is an expedited version of Neillsville. This is the quickest timeline for the Neillsville project. And essentially, this would, as part of the superintendent's recommendation, is to begin design this spring. So really, there's not much we can expedite with that project.
Thank you. Ms. Wolf?
I just want to thank you for your work on this. I think you pretty much answered all of the questions, and you answered them again here today, questions that I asked you previously. This is never easy work, as we all know. It's very emotional work, but I think I understand all the options, and I'm pretty satisfied with what I have to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tinbite?
And I also wanted to say thank you for the work on this. I know that this isn't easy, and I'm really thankful for the bus tour that we had quite a while ago. It really showed us what neighborhoods were where. Also, thank you for answering a lot of the questions that were brought up at the hearings. I know that that was also tough as well.
Ms. Dixon?
So thank you, Madam President. I just want to say to all of the students and parents and families and the community that are affected by the decision that we have to make. I think we all would love to do what everyone wants done. I think in lots of ways we're all pleasers. We want to please. But I think, the superintendent was very profound when he said that there are a lot of competing interests here. And, we are building schools, trying to relocate students as quickly as we can. Just the question about Neelsville. Well, there's a lot that goes into building a new school. You have the educational specifications, you have the design phase, and then, that process alone can take 2 years, just looking to make sure that you have everything that you need in the school. And so, we did when we met with the county council today, because what I really heard, and that concerned me, from all of our, those who testified, was just the horror of the transportation. And just to remind everyone that we have over 1 million people that live in Montgomery County. It's very disparate. As you build new facilities, someone has to move. And I think our staff has done a great job being very thoughtful, using the criteria that are in the Board of Education policy as well. But I did want the communities to know that when we met with the Board of Ed today, not the Board of Ed, the County Council, both Dr. Smith and I brought up the issue of transportation. And I was happy to see that they actually have it on their radar to work on improving that. The road infrastructure, the buses, as well. And we'd love to do things with, the snap of a finger, but unfortunately, it takes a lot of people to get these things going, and, the planning as well that goes into this. And so I want to thank you all as well for your work on this and for your patience, really, at answering some of the same questions over and over again. I think one of the things that, has resided with me as well is a statement Jennifer Jones made about, they did this maybe 20, 30 years ago, and she went to Seneca Valley, and the communities came together, and, our students did fine. She did fine as well. And I know that Dr. Smith is thinking ahead about, the work that needs to go forward after the board makes its decision, to bring communities together. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Smodrowski?
Yep. So I will associate myself with the comments of my colleagues in thanking you all for the work that you've done and for all of the time that you've put into answering all of our questions, and trying to help us address what I consider to be a bombarding of ideas and proposals and questions and concerns. But I do still have a couple of questions / concerns. We've been talking a lot about the transportation thing. One of the things that does concern me are the fact that buses will be essentially crossing each other. And so, just throwing that out there in terms of, as we look at the, as we talk about the transportation concerns. I know that, we've received photos of what happens, particularly up in the rural Boyd's area, if there is an accident, and how that affects students' ability to be on time and things like that. And I know that we were talking a little bit about the Neelsville utilization and stuff, but with a lot of what we heard in terms of their small hallways and things like that, I'm not 100% sure that that some fewer students in there until we get the school rebuilt would be an all bad thing. But and I know there were a lot of concerns because people felt a little bit like Northwest wasn't really heavily affected in the consideration of the options. I did have a question because we keep asking or referencing Northwest crowding issues being addressed with Crown, but as I understand it, and again, I tried to go on to double check it, but Northwest isn't listed in the list of schools to be looked at by Crown. I didn't think.
It should be. It's one of the 5. So it's Richard Montgomery, Northwest, Wooten, Gaithersburg, and Quince Orchard. And there was some conversation at the board table the last time about Rockville. So that isn't in the superintendent's, but certainly when it comes time to looking at boundaries or conversations or roundtables, certainly we can add any school. But those are the 5 initial schools.
Okay.
And I will confirm that in the CIP.
Yes. I do think, and we'll make sure that whatever final resolution comes to you for your vote next week, that's all very clear. But this isn't the last word on that particular project. This CIP is not. But I do think that Rockville High School should be in there, because looking at these maps, one of the things you have to look at is pressure upward, pressure downward, and pressure to each side. And when you think about downward pressure, depends on what happens in this central part of the county. We may need to push east to Rockville to use more space there for seats for students. And I think we just have to always think, any decision we make, the future growth, and there's no indication it's stopping, is going to have to be contended with, and we have to think about the sustainability of enrollment over time, that other factor that's in this policy. And so all of that was taken into consideration. I would say, not that I think anyone cares, but I want it on the record, I did not drive the neighborhood that you described for Germantown Elementary. I've driven virtually every other one, around every school, through every neighborhood in that area in the last 4 months. Every time I'm out and about, I'm gonna go look. Because seeing it versus seeing a map or a Google map is profoundly different. And so sometimes people look at things on maps and think, why don't they just do this and this and this? When you go see it, you see a whole different picture.
Absolutely. Dr. Daka or Mrs. Smardowski, were you finished? I didn't know. Okay. So,
I think my colleagues have said quite a number of things that we were very concerned about and that came out. I'm glad that we were able to meet with the council today. I think this is a different council. Before this, we had the council and the planning board sort of making decisions that put us in this position, and I don't think that's going to happen now, because they really are talking with us about our needs and how they can be very, very compatible with working with us. I too want to thank staff. I said this last night, and how many questions you've asked, how many times you've explained to us, how many trips you've done with us. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate that. You have tried to put us within the confines of our policies, which makes it even more difficult to make these decisions, that they're just not easily done. And I want to thank students for coming out and giving their opinions and their viewpoints, and they were very strong about it. And they came last week, and well, twice. They came out twice. And they've given up their time to really let adults know how they feel about it and how progressive they really are. And the only other thing I want to say is transportation. This is a small thing, but we're working closely with the county now, and they are providing free transportation for our students. They also need to look at the schedules, because when our students get out of school, there are no buses for them. And we've come up to that problem. I can think of Blake, I can think one summer at Northwood, we couldn't get any buses to pick up the kids. So it's a process that we have to do carefully and cooperatively with the county and the county government.
Mrs. Modrowski, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead,
That's
finish.
okay. Thank you. So I really do want to be very clear that this is not my not being supportive of Dr. Smith's recommendation. I think that I agree with Ms. Dixon that it was very, very thoughtfully put together, and I appreciate all of your all's work on it. I think it does, in a lot of ways, address the criterias that we've set for the boundary looks. I would like to offer that we put option 9 up for discussion again. I know that it doesn't mean that anybody has to ultimately end up voting for it over the superintendent's. I'm not trying to put anybody in a position where they feel like they have to make a choice here. I just think that we've received a lot of different possible options, and in reviewing everything and in talking with you all about the effects, the positive and negative effects of the different recommendations, I do still feel like 9 is something that would be worth talking about. And so I wanted to start with that.
So there's a motion on the table. Is there a second? So, hearing none,
All right.
let's move on.
In that case, then, I would like to offer an amendment that we could move the one, I guess it's considered a cul-de-sac for the Germantown Elementary School, so that neighborhood would stay together.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
All right. And then with that, I will just ask that if we could look at the rural Boyds community and see if there was anything that I guess would potentially be considered for helping with the traffic in the superintendent's, whether that's, I don't know if I have to make a motion to remove what would be considered rural Boyds now, or if the superintendent's is the only recommendation going forward, if we
You
can't
need to make
consider
that
it.
motion.
Well, before you make a motion, could we just get a little, like you just did the update, on how we came to, include rural Boyds?
So the rural Boyds area is, if you look at the map here, it's this whole area minus sort of that top portion. That top portion right there, that is Cabin Branch. So the area all down here is all considered rural Boyds for the most part. It is, as you can see, adjacent to the Seneca Valley cluster. So from a geographic perspective, it is adjacent to the Seneca Valley cluster. If rural Boyds,
I know, I keep messing
it is a tongue twister, was removed or not reassigned and remained in Clarksburg. So there are a couple of things from a geographic perspective, from a utilization perspective that would occur. From a geographic perspective, clearly Cabin Branch would become an island assignment. So you'd have this small area of Cabin Branch going to Seneca Valley High School, and you'd have this area then going to Clarksburg. I know that there were conversations and concerns, again, surrounding traffic. And there are, and I know it's very hard to see on this map, and you can't see it on this map, but there are roads and houses that are all in this lower portion. So when we provide the average travel times, we say it's an average, right, of the area. So potentially the people in the lower portion, because Seneca Valley is here, could actually get to Seneca Valley quicker than certainly the people in the upper portion. So again, depending on where you live in this large swath of area will depend on what your travel time would be. From a utilization perspective, to be honest, I don't have the numbers in front of me, what those numbers are. It is a more rural area. So it really, we're looking at from a geographic perspective, from keeping a community together. They're both Clarksburg, so that it would be a small portion of kids from Clarksburg Elementary School then continuing on and remaining in Clarksburg, as opposed to going with a larger cohort and going with Cabot Branch all to Seneca Valley High School. It's a geographic, as you can see, as well.
Thank you, Adrian.
Okay.
Okay.
Ms.
Thank
Twardowski,
you.
were you?
Well,
Zero.
it sounds like that probably won't go anywhere either. But I just want to say that, like I said, it's not that I'm unsupportive of the superintendent's recommendation. I just think that there seems to be a lot of interest in continuing the conversation. So I'm very disappointed that we, can't even have that conversation. But
You don't think we've had that conversation?
I think that, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess not as much as I think maybe we could have, but thank you.
All right, Mrs. O'Neill.
Well, just commenting on that, I mean, we certainly heard from people the other night, even though nothing else was on the table but the superintendent's recommendation, and we've received an avalanche of emails on a variety of positions, 9, 12, 11B, Green Ridge Estates, a whole bunch. So we have heard. I want to comment on a couple of things about traffic, and I do believe every part of this county has problems with traffic. I think one of the unique features of Clarksburg has been that the development has overwhelmed the road structure, the school structure, without money going in. Now we are going to approve we're going to build Clarksburg number 9. Fortunately, sites were dedicated in the planning of Clarksburg for basically 9 elementary schools. But, the money competes with all the other money. The building a new elementary school, brand new elementary school in Clarksburg, competes with Burnt Mills, with South Lake, with all the other demands that we have, because it's one pot of money. And, unfortunately, I don't know whether it's the planning board or the county council, has not put the money into the infrastructure. So you've built thousands of homes, and thousands more are coming in Clarksburg, and they didn't put in major thoroughfares to get the people out of there. And that is the problem. And, Clarksburg number 9 will be built. We just opened Stone Farm to relieve Wilson Wims. Wilson Wims had been at 1,100 kids, and Clarksburg Elementary is overcrowded. But, it will be relieved by Clarksburg number 9. But all the money, is competing with all the other needs. And it is a shame, and I don't know who is responsible for not putting the roads in Clarksburg, but it's not in our watch. But we have the problem of we have the fallout from poor planning from the county council and the planning board. And, the other thing that we heard in the hearings was about we are not relieving Clarksburg High School that much. And while Northwest is spoken to in this CIP to be relieved by Crown, Damascus was not included in this boundary study. And we do have a recommendation for a major capital project at Damascus. Might that at some point be a relief for Clarksburg?
Dr. Smith?
Yes, Damascus is one of our smallest high schools, and certainly that project will need to be considered as we watch the continued growth in this area for additional, especially as the any growth that moves northward or eastward in this area. Anything north and anything northeast or east is going to have to be considered as we significantly essentially replace Damascus High School and enlarge it in size, and that will have to be part of this conversation for the utilization that we need as a system. When I was talking about looking at how things push down to the south, push up to the north, to the west, and as we look at Clarksburg number 9, the site is actually on the west side of 270, and you have to consider then what does that look like? Will we once again open a school to have it at or over capacity within 1 or 2 years? And that is a serious concern. We need space for all of our children across every part of this county. So.
And just one other observation, about this process. I certainly appreciate parents believing in their schools, wanting to be invested in their schools. We want every child to have that, and every community to feel embracing of their schools. And, I just want to say, suddenly people were saying, providing supports for the Fox Chapel and Daly children. I just want to point out, when the boundaries were drawn for Clarksburg High School, some of the original children that went to Clarksburg, long before a shovel went in the ground, the first shovel for a house in Cabin Branch, were Daly and Fox Chapel. Am I not right that they were in the original boundaries for Clarksburg High School? So people, many of these options involve moving them, and I can appreciate that. It's easier to point to somebody else and say, move that community, but they are currently part of Clarksburg High School.
All right.
I just wanted to respond to my colleagues in terms of, yes, I do feel like we have heard. I also just feel like there were too many options put out there, in my opinion, without us having taken a step to narrowing it down some. When we at the policy committee were presented with, 7 or 8 calendar items, one of the main priorities was, let's not put 7 options out there or 8 options out there. Let's pick 3 that we think are worthy of, kind of having people submit opinions on. And so I do feel like there was a lot out there, and I feel like some of the communities didn't really fully get the opportunity to be heard from. And I'm basing that based on the Fox Chapel's PTA president's comment that, she felt like their community wasn't necessarily heard from. So just putting that out there.
But, and correct me if I'm wrong, a good bit of the options that we added were as a result of hearing from the community, what the community wanted us to add,
but
right?
I think we should.
Right. So
I'm just saying I feel like there could have been another layer maybe where we
I think
eliminated
that-
some of the things and said, let's
Right.
put these 3 or 4.
Something that we can certainly look at, and we'll debrief the process. We'd certainly want to debrief with the board and with parents and community members when it's all over. We did go to the Plumgar Community Center, which serves Fox Chapel. That was one of the outreach efforts that we did. And I think that you've seen, based on the survey responses, as well as the focus groups and the community centers that we've gone to, just the extensive outreach campaign. There's always more to do. There's always another phone call to make.
You want to reiterate the number of meetings we had again, the number of people, like, so people
Yeah, I mean,
hear and
there's
remember?
thousands.
Right. Okay, that's enough.
What I would say, just in terms of options, is it's a double-edged sword. And so
Right.
we've heard in years past,
Don't even know.
we started out with 8 options, 8 or 9, 8 options that we had. And then as a result of engaging the community, we went from 8 up to 14. It's hard at that point to then take options off the table that people have invested in, but there was absolutely energy around particular options, evidenced by, I think, the select few that you've heard over the last month or so, and that process culminated in the superintendent's recommendation. So I think it's something that we would definitely welcome the feedback from in a debrief when we're done, because this was the first time implementing this process with the board's new policy. So we look forward to continuing to refine that.
So Dr. Smith and then Mrs. O'Neill, and then we can go ahead with the presentation. Dr.
Well,
Smith.
I do think, Dr. Zuckerman, you're exactly right, that with the board's new policy that not only invites but compels us to look at adjacent clusters. And I think that if we're going to get the full utilization of our schools and the best, most effective attendance areas, it's going to demand that we look at larger pictures and then continue to narrow those down over time. So I don't think this is an anomaly. I think this is the way we will need to do business in the coming years, as we have 5 boundary studies just slated right now preliminarily ahead of us in the next 3 years. This year plus 2 more in order to open additions and schools that are planned. And then we have multiple schools and additions planned in the second 3 years that will all demand, how do you populate the school? And I think that's how we need to think about this, is that this is the way we do our work in the environment we're in now in Montgomery County. If we just gain, I'll tell you this, it kind of gives me a knot in my stomach when I open the enrollment on Friday, because I get it on the 1st and the 15th of every month. Friday was the 15th of November. We started on September 30th with 165,500 students. On September 30th, that was our official count. That's the day the state of Maryland says we must provide an account. On Friday, November 15th, 2019, we topped 166,000 students.
Whoa.
So that's a big change in the 3.5 years I've been here. Significant. And it demands we look at the use of all of our schools very carefully.
So in debriefing how this process operated, one of the criticisms we heard during the testimony was you had a focus group from Identity and from the NAAC, but not from the Asian American Parents Association or Student Achievement Group, whatever. And so, I mean, I think we have to be careful about, if we use Identity or LSAG, that we are providing equal opportunity across the groups. The Chinese American Parents Association, so I just throw that out. I don't know whether that was an oversight or how, but I assume parents from all groups were invited and were participants in the larger community meetings, but it was pointed out in the testimony.
I think it's a really good point, and something that we'll look at when we debrief. Identity and the NAACP Parents Council were helping us get to communities that we felt as though we had not heard from enough. And so it's something we'll look at. It wasn't uniquely their focus group as much as it was our focus group with them mobilizing people who we had not yet heard from our perspective. So we will certainly look at that as a part of the process and find ways to refine that.
Thank you. Mrs.
Can I just say one last thing?
Yep,
I'm sorry.
you can.
Just because I
Go ahead.
feel like I need to. So while I have a lot of the same concerns that we've heard from our constituencies, I do want to just kind of finalize by saying that Seneca Valley High School is one of my favorite schools in the county. I think that it is the school spirit and the sense of community there is it's amazing, and I do their graduations and stuff because I love the feeling that school and the students and the anyways, I think that eventually, however, obviously we know how this is going to end up, but I think everybody will end up being happy, and I just want our communities to know that these are great schools with great programs, and change is hard and moving is tough, and there will be a lot to work out, but I think ultimately all of our students will have a very positive school experience once we get through all of this stuff. So.
Thank you. And so we will allow you to continue on with the presentation.
Okay. The last thing we are just going to go through is the CIP. So the recommended CIP is $1.818 billion for the 6-year CIP. It's $74.2 million more than the approved CIP. The recommendation includes 5 new schools, 3 replacement schools, 14 addition projects, 9 major capital projects, and increases to a number of systemic projects, including HVAC, PLAR, Planned Life Asset Replacement Project, and roofs. Just to recap, and this was a slide that we had in our first presentation to you, just what does that mean? What does that look like? At the elementary school level, with those capital projects, we will add approximately 4,000 seats at the elementary school level. At the middle school level, about 2,000 seats, and at the high school level, a little more than 8,000 seats, for a total of 14,219 seats across the system within the 6-year period. These numbers do not include the major capital projects, and probably either in the spring or for next fall, we certainly can come back, and as part of our process, yet again, we will provide you what those major capital projects will bring you as well. But as Dr. Smith said, we're looking at expanding Damascus. South Lake will have additional seats. Probably all of Neelsville will probably have seats. I mean, they all will probably be expanded to some extent across the board. The distribution of the superintendent's CIP, we could start with the capacity projects. It's about 41% of the recommended CIP. The county-wide projects, about 30%. The major capital projects at almost $400 million is about 22% of the CIP. And the RevX, as we're finishing up the RevX program, we just have 5 projects left in that program, is about $127 million. And that is it.
I don't want to assume that we've exhausted all of our questions or comments, but Ms. Dixon, you thoughts?
So I know that we have Eastern Middle School in our sites. I'm wondering, if, let's say, just asked to add that school, what would that cost? And whether you would have the capacity, because I know that, the staff is only so many people, and there's a lot that goes into, building a new school. But, I mean, what you're thinking, I don't know what Dr. Smith's thinking is about it. I mean, I'll just bring it up. It was suggested by one of the county council members, just ask for it.
Sure.
Yeah, and see what we get.
I would defer to Seth on the capacity to do the work. Certainly, in terms of a budgetary issue, if we have the money, then we can proceed with the work, as long as we can actually get all the design and everything else that has to be done. And then, of course, there's the future potential for a boundary city. Right now, it would be scheduled to be in what year, Seth? I know it's not scheduled, but knowing that it's a future major capital project, when would it likely fall?
So more than likely, what we would recommend is in the 2 years to come back to the full CIP, we would start essentially the earliest design. What that would look like is essentially a 4-year window beyond that point. So I would say 2026 at this point, at the earliest, if we were to stay on the track that we are right now.
And you're looking at an additional, how many millions of dollars?
So it took about 8 months to develop these budgets that we put forward, but I would estimate anywhere between $45 and $60 million.
$60 million is what I would have figured is $60 million.
Yeah.
That would have to be added, so you'd be going from 74 million to 114 million to 134 million dollars in terms of above the current CIP, which my concern right now is the current spending affordability guidelines. This request exceeds that.
Right, so the council approved SAG back in early October, and it was $90 million less than what was approved last year.
Okay. Right. And you don't have all the people who could, I think that's an issue, having the staff who could do this work.
We would figure out a way, absolutely, if the funding is there.
All right. Yeah. Well, I don't know that there's energy, around it, but I just thought I'd just throw it out there.
We would love to do it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Dixon. So seeing no other, Ms. Silvestri?
I'm new at this, so I really want to understand the spending affordability guidelines. So I think the community thinks, well, this is what's recommended, this is going to get built. but can you please explain the situation that we are in and why we need all the help we can get, even just to get what's on paper here?
So I'll start, and then I'll turn it over to Adrian and Seth and Andy. This will go, whatever the board finally decides, will go to the county government on December 1st. They will continue to look at it. The county executive's office will continue to look at it and work on it. The county council will begin to engage with it during January and February. During that time, the county executive will put out a recommended budget. In my short tenure here, the last 3 years, we've been asked to come back with a list of what are called non-recommended cuts. And that essentially says, if you have to cut something, what would you cut or delay? More than cut, it's delay. What would you either move later in this CIP or into the next CIP? And we will go through that process if they come back with that request again this year. And then the county council, once that budget is out from the county executive, will take over, and we'll spend a lot of time meeting with them in hearings and going through all of these numbers again, and capacity and location and geography. And then at the end of May, they will vote on an operating budget and a capital budget at that time. So in my 3 years here, we've not had a CIP fully funded entirely. There have been, some level of reduction or pushback of projects. It's been, the first 2 years was smaller. Last year was a somewhat larger pushback of 50-some million dollars is my memory. Adrian, anything else that would be helpful in that?
So just to put a little bit in perspective with the numbers, so we talk about SAG. SAG goes by a total 6 years, and SAG is the bonds that are available in the 6 years for the county to spend. And it's not just for MCPS, it's for every county agency. It's for, the county's Department of General Services, for roads, for libraries, for rec centers, for everything.
The new Wheaton Library.
The Wheaton
is a
Library,
perfect example
everything and
of part of
anything that goes on in the county. And so the SAG is done by the first 2 years, similar to the way we do our CIP, and then a total. So the SAG that the council approved for FY21, what we're looking at now, is $320 million. So in FY21, they approved $320 million. Our expenditure for FY21 in the superintendent's recommendation is $378 million. So it's $60 million, almost $70 million above, $60 million above what the county has in its entirety for everyone in the county, not just MCPS. Now, we do get other funds. We get impact tax, we get recordation tax, we get state aid, but the majority of what funds our CIP are bonds. So already we are higher, our expenditure for FY21 is actually higher than the expenditure for the 21 year of bonds at $320 million.
Thank you.
And what has the state aid been the last few years?
So we were at 59 last year.
Yes.
It is going up because of the legislation. I know that there is talk about looking to infuse additional funding for us at the state level. That was a conversation last year as well. But if you think about, if we just continue where we are, we're about at $59 million. So if you think about what our expenditure is for that, for 21, which is 378, if you minus out that $60 million, now you're down to 310, and the bonds are 320. So again, we are very close to what the bonds are for countywide for Montgomery County.
Mrs. O'Neill.
Ms. Dixon had her
Oh, I
leg
didn't see. No, she just.
Oh, that just,
Oh, okay. So I have a question. We, during the conversation about the boundary study, a number of emails this weekend said, close Neelsville immediately. And I know we have other schools as well in the same sorts of condition. I mean, we're working on Ebrook Lee, South Lake, Burnt Mills, Poolsville, and Eastern, Damascus. The list kind of goes on and on. It requires money. But you know, if I'm a parent out there, you know, there were comments that it was unsafe. I mean, we have the fire marshal that has requirements for safety of our children, life-saving issues. I mean, you know, we're going to build the brand-new school next door to the existing school. How do we reassure parents that physically the building is safe? It may not be bright and shiny and new, but that it, you know, it's bizarre, the building with the ramp in there. It's like, sort of like being at Dulles Airport in some respects.
So I would say there would not be a building open right now if it were not safe from the perspective of fire codes and from egress and from basic life safety code. When you think about Neillsville, there are definitely aspects that are not ideal and don't fit within our 21st century facilities model. But to say it's not safe for students to be there today, I think is a very inaccurate statement. You know, we have spent quite a bit of time over the past, 2, 3, 4 years with the Neillsville community, 5 years with the Neillsville community. You know, we have looked for ways, and we continue to look for ways to make it a more enjoyable facility for both students and staff. But I can say from a safety perspective, it is safe. We will obviously always continue to look for ways to improve, but buildings would not be open if there were life safety challenges that were presented to you all at public hearings.
Okay. So that concludes the portion on our agenda. Item 3 is just follow-ups from our previous work session and our hearings. And if I can get a motion to adjourn.
Move adjourned.
Second.
Been moved and seconded, all in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you so much.